Do you ever wonder how we got here? How we ended up where we ended up? I don't mean in the general sense. We're here in this vale of tears because Adam ate the apple and we keep on eating it. No, I'm talking about the church. How did she get in the mess she's in today? Oh, and don't tell me she's not in a mess. Oh, the church herself is holy and indefectible, no argument there. But look at parishes and dioceses all over the world, but especially in the West. Look at the crazy stuff that goes on. Banal music, man-centered liturgies, legions of Eucharistic ministers, people chattering during Mass, and that's if they go to Mass at all. Liturgical dances, people dressed like they're at a barbecue. The list goes on and on. We opened up the files and identified some of the more egregious abuses, talked about why they were wrong, and asked how we got here. The answer is pretty simple. All these abuses can be traced to a Protestant influence in the church, an influence that emphasizes man over God, that blurs the distinction between the sacred and the profane, between priests and the laity, even between men and women. All of these abuses are oriented, consciously or not, towards one thing and one thing only, shifting the focus of the liturgy from God to man, shifting the attention of the congregation from the sacrifice of the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ on the altar to literally anything else. It's a diabolical plan to deny Catholics, if not the sacraments themselves, the most efficacious presentation of the sacraments. It's a plan to lead men away from heaven so they slip into hell. Now, if you ask the men who were and are behind these changes, they'd never say that. First, if that was their intended goal, they'd never admit it. But most of them don't realize that is what they're doing. They think they're helping. They have the laudable goals of making the liturgy more accessible, of getting greater participation. They honestly think they are doing the right thing. Of course, when the effects are seen, the decline in Mass attendance, the denial of doctrine, the wholesale collapse of the faith in the Western world, their intentions are all but irrelevant. At best, these men are useful idiots, unaware of the damage they are causing. At worst, well, it doesn't bear thinking about. Willing or duped, innocent or not, these men are agents of darkness. They are doing the work of Satan, striking right at the heart of the Catholic character of the Catholic faith, chipping away at the important distinctions between God and man, sacred and profane, leveling the glorious spires of the Church's doctrine to a low, flat-roofed, whitewashed warehouse, which, coincidentally enough, is what they did to architecture. As I said, these men are likely, hopefully, unwitting agents of darkness, useful idiots being used as a cat's paw by Satan. There aren't any judgments made here about subjective guilt or intention. That said, it's hard to believe they were innocent when you see how one particular change was rammed through against canon law, against tradition, even against the Pope himself. That change was communion in the hand. There's a reason that this is the thickest of the files, and not just because this particular abuse, and it is an abuse, is such a brutal assault on belief in the real presence of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist, which is the source and summit of the Catholic faith. That alone, the implicit denial inherent in the cavalier application of this liturgical innovation, would be enough. But there are other reasons, and in many ways they are worse than the abuse itself. This is a thick file because this case, more than any other, was a deliberate attempt to Protestantize the Church and deny the real presence of Jesus Christ in the Mass and the Eucharist. A planned, orchestrated attempt carried out by men sworn to serve Jesus Christ and uphold the teachings of his Church. And it was a very effective attempt indeed. Today, in most parishes, it's rare to see anyone, let alone a majority of people, receiving the Eucharist on the tongue. Not only that, but reception in the hand has become almost mandated by priests, bishops, and their scurrying legion of Eucharistic ministers of Holy Communion. If you try to receive the Eucharist in the manner Catholics received it for over a millennium, that is, kneeling and on the tongue, you are often discouraged, ostracized, or outright mocked. We've already talked about why communion in the hand is such a terrible idea. That was this file. I don't want to retread that ground. Instead, we're going to look at how the ancient practice of the Church of receiving on the tongue and kneeling was undone in just a few short years following the Second Vatican Council. But not because of the Second Vatican Council. You can look through all of the documents of Vatican II, and I know because I have, and you won't find a single reference to allowing communion in the hand. And that surprises many people. They naturally think that because the change happened after the council must have called for it, encouraged it, or at least allowed it as an option. Nothing is further from the truth. Don't just take my word for it. Listen to what Malcolm Cardinal Ranjith has to say. I think it is now time to evaluate carefully the practice of communion in the hand, and if necessary, to abandon what was actually never called for in the Vatican II document Sacrosanctum Concilium, nor by the Council Fathers, but was in fact accepted after it was introduced as an abuse in some countries. At the same time, speaking of communion in the hand, it is necessary for all to recognize that the practice was introduced as an abuse and hurriedly in many places within the Church right after the Council. Cardinal Ranjith wrote those words when he was Archbishop Ranjith, the secretary of the Vatican's Congregation for Divine Worship and Discipline of the Sacraments. 2 years later, he was elevated to cardinal by Pope Benedict XVI. He wrote them as part of an introduction to Dominus Est, It is the Lord, written by Bishop Athanasius Schneider. In this gem of a book, Bishop Schneider talks beautifully about the real presence of Jesus Christ in the Eucharist and eloquently calls for an end to communion in the hand and a return to the ancient and reverent practice of reception kneeling and on the tongue. But of course, you know that and believe it. We've been through this file before, and that's not why we're here. We're here not because of the why, we're here because of the how. And Cardinal Ranjith's words strike right at the heart of the question of how we got here. The Second Vatican Council never mandated, encouraged, or even allowed communion in the hand. The practice is nowhere to be found in the prevailing and perennial tradition of the Church. Canon law didn't allow it and specifically forbade it in all but the most obscure and specific of circumstances. And to put the cherry on top of this bleak Sunday, the Pope himself, and not just one, spoke out against it. So, how did we end up here? We ended up here because of the machinations of, at best, useful idiots. It was the concerted efforts of agents of darkness bringing their own power, prestige, and intelligence to bear on the Church in order to further their own man-centered agenda. It was an organized attempt to change Catholic practice into something more Protestant. There were behind-the-scenes meeting and votes, skullduggery and obfuscations, deceptions and lies. Most Catholics have no idea this happened. Most Catholics, even good ones, have swallowed the lie that communion in the hand was called for, was allowed, was legitimately introduced, that it's good, preferred, the best way. None of that is true, and we can prove it, and we will. These were deeds done in the shadows by, witting or unwitting, agents of darkness. Most people, most Catholics, are blissfully unaware of the plots that were hatched behind the smiling face of the Church of Nice. But there's a paper trail. There are documents. There are records that can be found and put in their proper place. And that's why I've assembled my team, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to find these documents, follow the paper trail, and chase down the truth. We're going to expose shadowy deeds done by agents of darkness to the light. At the end of this, you'll know the secrets they want to hide. You'll know who and how managed to upend over 1,000 years of Catholic tradition nearly overnight. You'll have all the tools you need to fight this liturgical abuse. What you choose to do with that information is up to you. For now, I've got to go put my team to work.